When you think of court cases pre-1970, your mind probably goes to one that had a huge legislative impact on the government. Things that they taught you in history class, like Brown versus Board of Education, Marbury versus Madison, Gideon versus Wainwright, just to name a few. Today, we are not talking about that side of legal history, because if you think about cases today, there is a whole other side of them that plague the culture, the sensationalized, press-driven cases. Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, the inevitable Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, cases that involve public figures who take the stand and are often on a quest to clear their names, where the courtroom becomes a stage. In 1891, this exact thing happened, and involved, for the first time in centuries, a future king taking the stand in a brutal cross-examination, the press in a state of mania, people on all sides angry at somebody, and at the center, a game of Baccarat gone very wrong. London, late winter, 1891. A man, long beard, disheveled, and unkempt from weeks of neglect, sits with his head dug deep into his hands. Something was on Sir William Gordon-Cumming's mind. He had made a decision. He was about to betray his closest friends to save his life. Betrayed, coerced, set up, and now had hit rock bottom, he was on the verge of losing everything. He had been promised silence in exchange for his honor, and this promise, over the course of months, had slowly been unraveling into a lie. Threatened with losing his job, serving his country for decades, and turning into a public disgrace had finally been enough for the middle-aged baronet. So, he did what he had to, and put it in the hands of the law. But who is William Gordon-Cumming? Or at least, who was he up until the nights of September 8th and 9th of 1890? Born July 20th, 1848, in Forres, Marienshire, I'm going to try that again later, but not right now, in modern-day Scotland. His father was Alexander Penrose Gordon-Cumming, the third of the Gordon-Cumming baronets. He studied at Eton College, and then at 18 became baronet himself, inheriting it from his father and becoming chief of Clan Cumming. His life was then followed by a slow rising through the ranks of the British Empire. First, in 1879, he was in the Anglo-Zulu War and fought in the Battle of Ulundi. For 23 years he served, and as he rose, so did his reputation, which takes us to now, where he is the Lieutenant Colonel of the Scottish Guards. For 20 of those 23 years, he had a best friend, how wholesome, named Owen Williams. They became very close very quick, both military men. As they together rose through the ranks, became acquainted with the Prince of Wales. They were friends from the 1860s all the way through the end of the 1880s. There is not much documented about their friendship. However, he is the reason Cumming came to Tranby Croft the night of September 8th, 1890. He, Owen, and the Prince of Wales, one day to be King Edward VII, through the decades grew to be a dangerous trio. They all had status, wealth, and, by reputation, honor. Cumming even visited him at Sandringham House on multiple occasions. They shared social clubs like the Turf Club, where our old friend St. George Gore was also a member, and at some point throughout this friendship they had taken up a mutual pastime, the game of Baccarat. Due to the Gaming Act of 1845, this was against the law, even though largely unenforceable. On top of that, cheating was even worse. I mentioned that for no reason. The trio often played during house parties and had gotten to the point where the Prince of Wales would carry around counters, or chips, around with him when he traveled. They were Baccarat pros. According to the testimonies, they played with Cumming on multiple occasions throughout many years, which makes catching them at cheating all of a sudden kind of sus. So that's where we're at. An accomplished man who surrounded himself with trusted and honorable friends. Based on their letters, which I will read, they spoke to each other very intimately, such as signing letters ending with, "I am yours sincerely, and ever yours." Because of this friendship, Gordon would be invited in 1890 to watch a horse race with Owen Williams and the Prince of Wales at a house nearby called Tranby Croft, where they would be hosted by, albeit acquaintances, the Wilsons. The Prince was to bring his counters, chips, and they would be spending 3 days betting on the horses and 3 nights gambling. What a trip. So of course he accepted. He and the future king rode together. This was his second time going to Tranby Croft and his second time seeing most of the Wilsons. But with Owen Williams and other close friend Lord Coventry waiting to meet them there, they would hit the road in the afternoon of September 8th, 1980. Little did he know, this trip was going to ruin his entire life. Alright, let's start at the beginning. His carriage arrives right before dinner on Monday, with the Doncaster races beginning the next morning. Before meeting anyone, he makes his way up to the room and freshens up for dinner. At dinner, around 8 o'clock, he sees Owen Williams and Lord Coventry for the first time. He also meets the players for the game that night, which include Berkeley Levitt, the young lad. Berkeley, the youngest member of the party, was close to coming due to him working under him at the Scottish Guards. He was excited to see somebody that he saw as a mentor and play some baccarat with him. He's just happy to be here. Arthur Stanley Wilson, the scout. Born into wealth, Arthur Stanley was the son of the Wilsons. Truth is, Cumming barely knew him. More than likely, throughout the years during his couple of interactions with the Wilsons, he most likely saw him grow up. Now, a young man, he had no job, no aspirations, and during his testimony, admitted to dropping out of school to pursue nothing in particular. Okay? Needless to say, he wanted to win some money. Lysette Green, the houndkeeper. Mrs. Wilson's son-in-law, his wife, now Mrs. Lysette Green, also played that night. He worked as the Wilsons' houndkeeper. Cumming had stayed with him in London on some occasions, and they were considered close acquaintances. He was a good talker, and by all accounts, observant. He was the oldest of the men in the group, and the de facto leader of the young guys. Mrs. Wilson, the queen. The host. Her one goal was to make sure everybody stayed cordial and respectful. In the world of aristocratic Victorian England, status meant class, and if anything went wrong in her house, with her in control, her status would be gone. So she was locked into the game to make sure everyone kept cool and nothing went south. And of course, Lord Coventry, the ace, Owen Williams, the jack, Albert Williams, future King Edward VII, the king, and William Gordon-Cumming, the joker. With the group assembled, Cumming was about to be hunted. At around 11 p.m., they all sat down in a room separate from the rest of the party to play the game. The Prince of Wales acted as the dealer, and Owen Williams acted as the croupier, meaning that they, in theory, had their eyes everywhere, and were responsible for all the money on both sides of the bet, the banker and the player. One second. If you do not know the rules of baccarat, I will quickly explain them to you right now. This was chemin de fer, a French version of baccarat, favored by aristocrats at the time. It's not like the casino version that you might see today, so it's probably important to go over it. This version was more intimate, more social, and much easier to cheat at. There's no house or dealer in charge. Instead, one player acts as the banker, and the others take turns betting against him. And of course, the banker was the prince. The goal was to get as close to 9 as possible. No busting, no strategy charts, just 9 is the magic number. You get 2 cards. You add them up, but here's the twist. Face cards and 10s, worth 0. And aces were worth 1. If your total goes over 9, you just drop the first digit. So 7 plus 6 is 13, that becomes 3. 9 plus 1 is 10, which becomes 0. And 5 plus 3 just becomes 8. Whoever has the highest total wins the coup, or the round, but I'm going to call it coup. The banker deals 2 sets of cards, one for the banker and one for the player. So individual players do not have a hand of cards in front of them. The prince was on the side of the banker for every hand, and the players were, fittingly, the players. Okay, back to the story. They play deep into the night, laughing, drinking, and getting to know each other. Cumming wins big. He's betting more than anyone else, and it's paying off. His strategy was he'd put a 5-pound chip down for a hand. Then, if he won, he'd keep the 5-pound counter there. He himself would add another 5 pounds, adding up to 15 pounds if he won the hand. This right here totaled to about $2,300 US in today's money. The Wilsons, the Greens, and practically everyone noticed the high amount that Cumming was betting and ultimately won that night. Nothing seems off to him though, and an hour and a half later he decides to go to bed and wrap up the game. On the second day, in the morning, they took a saloon carriage to the races. The Wilsons and Berkeley Levitt took a separate one and met them there. They enjoyed the races until returning back to the house. Here, they do the rerun. Dinner, baccarat, bed by 12:30. The key difference here is the table. Now, they had a proper baccarat table to play on, which included a line in... Which included a line to which you had to put your counters over to place a bet. Clear as day. There weren't any issues yet again, except for one little weird moment. Cumming put his counters on. He claimed 15, and when the hand won, the prince paid Cumming 5 pounds. I think you're short a few, commented Cumming, to which the king responded, I wish you would put your counters somewhere a little more visible. Strange, but the prince had a game to focus on, so he could have been making a small mistake. One more peculiarity to mention, about halfway through the evening, Lycett Green gets up and leaves the room, only to return a few minutes later. Also a little strange, but nothing too out of the ordinary. After a night of play, the party broke up and returned to their rooms, ready for the next day at the races and hopefully another night of gambling. This did not happen. Early on the 10th, the Wilsons receive a call notifying them that Mrs. Wilson's brother-in-law had died. This obviously shattered the family. When Cumming offered to break up the party and return home, she insisted he stay right there and carry on as if nothing happened. She didn't want to ruin the party. So they returned to the races, spent the day apart, socializing and returning at the same time. Once Cumming returned to his room, and while he was getting ready, he received visitors, Owen Williams and Lord Coventry. He immediately feels that something is wrong. Something is very disagreeable that occurred in this house. Some of the people staying here object to your manner of playing baccarat. After talking briefly, Cumming understood how serious this claim was. He was being accused of cheating. Not once, not just twice, but over 10 times. This wasn't with $5 hands either. In today's money, the amount he was being accused of cheating over is in the six figures. So he pleaded with his friends for his next move. What should I do? He demanded to speak with the prince, which they would do after dinner. They would continue getting ready and go down to dinner. It was typical, like nothing had been going on at all. After a death in the family and cheating claims sprouting in many parties throughout the house, they talked like everything was fine, and at 10 returned to their rooms. Back in his room, still stunned, he doubles down on an interesting move. He doesn't want to confront his accusers at all, like ever. He demands a meeting with the prince instead, which they grant. At 10:30, he meets with them. You were banker, you believe me, right? He pleads. There are 5 witnesses to 1. Even though Cumming insists over and over his innocence, throughout the night, he never once drops these claims. He then leaves the room around 11 so that the prince can conduct interviews with every one of his accusers. At around 11:30, Owen Williams and Lord Coventry return to his room after the interviews have been complete. They told him that the only way this avoids becoming a massive, life-ending scandal would be to sign a document that the party had written, specifically Lycett Green. The document included a promise. In exchange for silence from the accusers, Cumming could never play a game of cards again. Why, this would be tantamount to an admission of guilt, he accurately pinpointed. If he didn't sign it, they would all spread the story at the races the next day, so, out of options, he again asks for his friend's advice. Lifelong friends. Do you recommend me sign it? We do. And just like that, Cumming made a mistake that would be irreversible. If this were to get out, his life would be ruined, and with an admission of guilt signed, there would be nothing he could do to clear his name. He knew the stakes were high, so in the early morning, before anyone had woken up, he snuck out, never to see his accusers again. At least, not until the trial. So that's it. That's the whole thing. Why was this scandal so huge? Well, this is bigger than just a game of baccarat. You need to put your Victorian class system hats on and envision the possible risks here. The aristocracy held the power of being more honorable than the common man in the 19th century. The idea that not only did they illegally play a game of baccarat, but the king let one of them cheat would destroy the fabric of the people's belief in this class system. Class was so embedded in their way of life that when this eventually does go to court, the plaintiff and his lawyer, Sir Edward Clarke, do not call witnesses if their class wasn't high enough for the other witnesses in the case, even if it would have helped Cumming win. Because of this, the person sitting directly next to Cumming on the 9th was not called, despite them having the best view of the accused cheating. In any case, let's review his story. He claims he noticed nothing, and the entire thing was a misunderstanding, either intentionally by the Wilsons, or they mistook his gameplay for cheating. They claimed that after the cards were dealt, if they seemed favorable, he would add £10 to his hand illegally, going up to 15. If you remember, this is also eerily similar to his strategy of adding to his stake after the coup if it hit. This was their argument in court. It does seem rather weird to me that all the accusers, with the exception of young Berkeley Levitt, were all members of the same family. At no point in this case do they bring in somebody who was at the table who is not directly involved, either as a friend of Cumming or one of the people that he is taking action against. In this case, we will get to the sides of Owen Williams, Lord Coventry, Berkeley Levitt, Mrs. Wilson, young Stanley Wilson, Mr. and Mrs. Lightset Green, and the future king. No impartial witnesses that were at the table. I find this decision baffling, especially because all of the accusers were hosts of the party and all in the same family. It would have been easy for them to corroborate each other's stories. Instead, we get witness testimonies that absolutely bury Cumming. He was fed to the wolves to protect the aristocracy, and that is what makes this case so interesting. The promise of silence in the letter is what opened the door to Cumming's case against the defense. However, if the defense can prove to the jury that he did in fact cheat at cards, nothing else matters. So the case quickly became about Cumming clearing his name and nothing else. Sitting on the stand after telling his side, Cumming was still very insistent that this was all a big misunderstanding. He was at risk of losing his 23-year rank in the army and had become a pariah in the tabloids. Day one of the trial was held on June 1st, 1891. Charles Russell was leading the defense, and he was all over Cumming. This is a real exchange from the examination. You had, I suppose, a pencil? I had. Was it a pencil of unusually large dimensions? I think it was just an ordinary pencil. Was it a carpenter's pencil? No, I think not. Well, on the second night, had you a pencil of the character I have designated? To the best of my recollection, I had not. I only had an ordinary pencil. On the first night, I'm trying to think, on neither night, as far as I can recollect, had I any other than an ordinary pencil. Now, there's a lot more to this story than what I've told you so far. Now that you've lived the nights through Cumming, you'll remember that there were quite a few instances where it was clear other things were going on in the house around him that he was oblivious to. He wasn't in the one-on-one meetings with the prince. When he met with Owen and Coventry, it had been clear that the people in the house had been talking. Before we get into the trial, let's keep living with Cumming as this secret slowly tears his life apart and he descends into desperation, which ultimately leads to this trial. Cumming was a mess, frantically writing letters to Owen during the months between September and June, the weight of those nights hanging over him. He had a feeling it couldn't be a secret for long. On the 11th of September, he wrote to Owen, "Dear Owen, I hope you will take an opportunity of telling the Prince of Wales how entirely I was guided in my action yesterday by his advice and yours and Coventry's." Within 24 hours, this shows how he had already realized the mistake that he had made. He goes on to say that with the overwhelming evidence against him, he understands that they can no longer be associated together, and how he understands that it is of the utmost importance that this scandal stays silent for everyone. Owen, his old friend, writes back the next day, saying none of them wish to give him harm and they all want the same thing, so let's just move on. In Cumming's response, he says, "This secret is in the hands of far too many to remain a secret for long." It's important to note that while the Prince, Owen, and Coventry believed him to be guilty, they did not themselves see any acts of cheating. They were merely going off of the evidence that we will get into. For months, they carry on with their lives. They do not meet, and he stops all contact with the prince. On December 27th, he receives an anonymous telegraph from Paris. It reads like this: "They are beginning to talk much here of what passed at Newmarket this summer and of your sad adventure. If you come to Paris or to Monte Carlo, be very reserved and do not touch a card. They have talked too much about it. Signed, someone who pities you." Now, this telegraph being anonymous is interesting, but it's unlikely it was from anyone that was there on that trip, just because he says Newmarket, they were at Tranby Croft. This telegram sparks everything that comes after. The rumor had spread. Since it was now made public, he could fight it. In January, he decides it's only a matter of time before it reaches his commanding officer, so he decides to get ahead of it and tell him everything. Colonel Stracey. At the meeting, he gave Stracey a letter of retirement with half pay, knowing it would be the end of his command either way, so trying to retire with a little bit of something. Stracey tells him that he cannot offer him that half pay because he signed the letter accepting guilt, so he would need to prove his innocence before being granted this half pay. He talks with Coventry and Owen about getting the Lycett Greens and the Wilsons to retract their accusation, to which they decline. Owen, however, does write him a letter where he says, at no point that entire night or trip or ever since did he admit his guilt. He was fighting and very insistent the entire time. Hoping this helps, Cumming shows him the letter, and Stracey declines. Still looks very bad. So in a last-ditch effort to clear his name, he meets with one of the accusers that he had the best chance at swaying, the young Berkeley Levitt. January 25th, he invited Levitt to his house for a private meeting. He accepts, and arrives at 5:30. I suppose you know what I want to talk about. It's all out. It's all over the place. I'm utterly ruined, Cumming says. He then pleads to him, "You must know you are in error. Surely you cannot believe this thing of me." To which Berkeley Levitt responds, "I cannot disbelieve my own eyes." Berkeley expresses regret in his senior officer getting all this negative press over his accusations. After a tense back and forth where Cumming pleads with him, Levitt agrees to try with Mrs. Wilson and see if they could pull their accusations publicly. He deeply hoped that this Hail Mary would work and solve the whole matter. It doesn't, and Miss Wilson refuses to retract. However, since in this letter silence is promised by all the accusers, he has an opening to clear his name. On the 28th of January, with the ground crumbling from under him and no one budging, he presses charges against his 5 accusers. For the first time in modern history, a future king was brought to the stand. It was against his wishes. He was subpoenaed and left with no choice. He was charming, friendly, and unfortunately completely tangled in this illegal gambling scandal. The press was going nuts. The Times covered the trial extensively, with him always in the headlines. He knew anything he said on the stand would be used against him, so what followed was an almost impressive streak of non-answers. As the banker, he would have been the first person to notice if anyone was adding to their stakes mid-hand, because he'd be the one paying them out. So why, when the Wilsons came to him on the night of the 10th to tell him of the cheating, was he so surprised? In his testimony, he mentions being very surprised and not having seen the cheating himself. The Solicitor General representing Cumming truly had his work cut out for him. He couldn't directly call out the king or press him aggressively, so what we were left with is not much. These elites they brought in to testify had the same goal: to protect their status in the aristocracy. And their only way for them to do that was to make sure that Cumming was guilty. He talks about how, as the banker, he was only focused on the vibes. He was drinking, flipping cards, and enjoying his night, which is why he didn't notice any cheating, and he wouldn't have noticed it. He said, "I discovered no irregularities." Dude, you were the banker. That was your whole job. So I think it's BS. I think he knew he didn't see any cheating, but because 5 people had ganged up on Cumming, he did not want to go down with him. So what happened with Owen that turned him against his friend of over 2 decades? Well, let's start from the beginning. Owen gets to Tranby Croft the same time as Cumming. He notices no foul play on the 8th, nor on the 9th. He goes to the races on the 10th and hears nothing there. He returns, and around 7 p.m., he hears about it for the first time. Lord Coventry brings him aside in the smoking room. He tells him something very disagreeable has happened. "I need you to meet me in my room." Williams complies. When he gets there, he is bombarded with Lycett Green, young Arthur Stanley Wilson, and another couple who are not important here, the Somersets. I will not mention them again because they are more echoers than they are people who themselves saw any cheating or matter at all. So, into the bin with them. Lycett Green goes on to explain to him what he had seen. He claims that on both nights, first observed by Arthur Stanley Wilson, William Gordon-Cumming repeatedly, after the game had started, added 10 pounds of his stake after knowing they were going to win the hand. While word quickly spreads throughout the house, Cumming is still entirely unaware. Owen and Coventry go to the prince for some consultation, but also to see if he, as the banker, would have a clear answer. He doesn't, but he also wants this to be over and hushed up as quickly as possible to avoid a scandal. Everyone in the house, and we will get to this with other storylines that are happening concurrently with Owen's, seem to want this buried, but at the same time want some sort of justice for the man that they believe robbed them of over $35,000 in today's money. Coventry and Williams go to meet with Cumming right before dinner. Their talk happens, and seems to go down in his testimony the same way it went down in Cumming's. While the prince conducts interviews with the witnesses, Coventry and Williams break aside to speak to Lycett Green in the smoking room. Here, Owen suggests writing a statement to get the matter cleared that night, to which Lycett is immediately on board. Lycett writes the letter, and the witnesses sign it, and they take the letter and give it to Cumming. Cumming signs it, like we know. The next day, the group breaks, and a week later, on the 20th of September, Owen Williams writes a document at his home, which they call the Précis, recounting the events of the trip while it was fresh on the memory. He then ships it off to the witnesses to sign again, and to the Prince of Wales so he can seal it in his records in case it ever needs to be seen again for a trial, perhaps? This Précis in trial gets ripped apart. Multiple lies are spotted when questioning the Greens and the Wilsons. Since a lot of this Owen wasn't directly around for, the Wilsons and Green signatures on the Précis carried a lot of weight, And when specifically Mrs. Wilson gives her testimony, it's revealed to be totally unreliable. By the time he is giving his testimony, he has had months to process the incident and to come up with a shared story. It presumably broke his heart to turn on such a longtime friend, whom he, even as Crouper, did not see cheating, but with 5 witnesses, he was forced to take a side. I believe he thought Cumming was innocent in these moments, and even during his time on the stand, but the weight of what was at stake was too heavy for him to defy the group. Coward. Young Arthur Stanley Wilson was the first one to notice Cumming cheating on the night of the 8th. That is why his story is the most important one. His initial noticing of Cumming adding to his stakes mid-game sows chaos for the rest of the trip and is the key catalyst for this entire scandal. Could he have misseen it? Could he have not understood the rules or the way that Cumming was playing? Well, we'll see. The son of Mrs. Wilson, who was hosting, and Mr. Arthur Wilson, who detested gambling and barely partook, young Arthur Stanley Wilson was sitting next to Berkeley Levitt on the night of the 8th. Unfortunately for him, he was also next to Cumming. As Wilson was enjoying his night, the game had just begun. In his peripheral, he sees Cumming put 5 pounds down for his stake, and Wilson follows with his own 5-pound counter. The hand begins. Lord Edward Somerset, who is dealing, starts flipping over the cards for the banker and the player. It slowly becomes clear that the players are going to win. Wilson is prematurely getting excited. He's about to win the very first hand, until, before it's all said and done, back in his periphery, he spots something. The world slows down. Even though he isn't directly looking, it is as clear as day. 2 bright red counters slipping out of the palm of Cumming and into the pile. Middle of the game, he snaps back to reality. They win the hand. Everyone gets paid. Stunned, he turns to Berkeley Levitt, who is under Cumming and in the same platoon in the army. He says, "My God, Berkeley, this is too hot." "What on earth do you mean?" "This man next to me is cheating." "My dear chap," Berkeley started, "you must have made some mistake. It's absolutely impossible." "Okay, well, look for yourself," he retorted. It only took a couple of coups, but he quickly flagged it himself. He claims he saw a 5-pound counter staked for a play, then once favorable cards were drawn, he used his pencil and slowly dragged a 2-pound counter to the middle of the stake. Okay, I want to chime in here and say something really quickly. This makes literally no sense. Seriously. Not only can you clearly see me adding to my stake, the pencil makes it way more noticeable, and at the same time, you can only put them next to each other with this pencil thing. You can't, you have to put them on top of each other. If you've ever been to a casino, you know you got to put them on top of each other. Like, it's obvious. This is strange. I mean, I feel like that's way too obvious. This is the part of the video where we take all of their versions of the story as gospel, so let's continue. That night, after the game breaks, Arthur follows Berkeley up to his room to debrief. Berkeley throws himself face down across his bed. "Oh my God, what am I gonna do?" Berkeley probably echoed out as his head was still buried into his pillow. Alone in the room, they spiral. "What are we gonna do? What are we gonna do?" "We? He's in my regiment. Don't ask me." Okay. Let me talk to my brother-in-law in the morning. We can figure this out." "What?" he probably said, as the 2 young, usually unserious boys told him this very serious news. The 30-year-old Lysette Green had received word from his brother-in-law that he wanted to get some time alone with him and that something was on his mind. Green thought it was strange, but welcomed the invitation. Aside from 1 or 2 counters, he didn't play Baccarat the night before, and so he was looking forward to hearing how it went. "I have something terrible to tell you. Sir William Gordon-Cumming was cheating at Baccarat." "What? That cannot be true." "I'm sure of it. Berkeley Levitt saw it too." This was serious. A scandal at the Wilsons could be detrimental to their status, so he springs into action. He tells his wife, then organizes a plan. He places a call and orders an official Baccarat table to be delivered by horse before they return to play that evening. The idea here would be to make cheating impossible. This table had a clear line on it, making the cheating incredibly noticeable. The Wilsons and the Greens were all aware this was the reason the table was brought in. He also notified his mother-in-law, Mrs. Wilson, who would be playing that night as well. Definitely now, just to make sure there was no cheating while she was hosting. Gambling on night 2 begins. Now, Cumming is surrounded by people who have spent the entire day colluding against him. Lysette Green, Stanley Wilson, Mrs. Wilson, all people that would soon be defendants in this case. Lyset, now not only playing, but observing as well, notices Cumming sitting awkwardly over the white line, which is intended to clarify which counters are being staked in the coup. He then saw Cumming drop chips into his pile. Bang. Cheater confirmed. So, what does he do? Does he confront Cumming? Does he stop the game to save the group from his stealing? Nope, neither, nothing. Instead, he is shy and gets up and walks into the next room, the smoking room. Once there, he crafts a letter to his mother-in-law, Mrs. Wilson. He writes, "I have distinctly seen Sir William Gordon-Cumming cheat at cards." He then hands the note to his butler, and the butler runs it to Mrs. Wilson. During their testimony, they all make it clear that they were not actively watching Cumming to see if he cheated. However, I am indeed calling cap. They all saw the cheating, and since no other witnesses were called, I'm going to assume they did not see anything a la the Prince and Owen Williams. The fact that they all saw cheating, and the fact that Lyset actually secured a new table himself played, largely suggests that they did in fact have a shared goal of watching him. These boys make up our parcel of boys. Lyset Green, Berkeley Levitt, Arthur Stanley Wilson. These are just kids, and who were presumably very drunk. I think that they were probably looking for cheating, confirmation bias. They saw what they were looking for, even if it wasn't true, even if it was just how he played. One of the more interesting testimonies, Mrs. Wilson completely falls apart. On night 2 of play, the night of the official table and everyone being made aware to be on the lookout for foul play, Mrs. Wilson herself doesn't notice anything. She sees no cheating, although she claims to have not been watching, until she receives that letter from the butler. "I have distinctly seen Sir William Gordon-Cumming cheat at cards." Peculiar. So she then decides to watch, where, 2 coups later, sees it for herself. It's suspiciously consistent with her son's testimony, where her son claimed that he used a pencil to move the counters onto his stake after the cards were dealt, and after it was clear that they were going to win. In cross-examination, Edward Clark accurately points out how strange this is. You are hosting a party, and halfway through, you see for yourself, without question, one of your guests cheating and actively robbing your guests. Who would let that game continue? Why didn't she make a scene or do anything? In her answer, she says she did in fact discreetly end the game. At around 12:30, she insisted everyone go get some sleep so that they could be ready for the races tomorrow. Here's why that makes no sense. That was the exact way she ended the game the night before when she was not aware of any cheating. So her discreet way of ending the game was to let them continue playing for an hour and then let the game end at the exact time when it was naturally about to end anyways. I know I'm making it sound like I'm fully on Cumming's side, but I am not. I just think there are a lot of holes in the defense that were not explored upon during this trial, and there was not enough evidence here for what ends up being a very straightforward verdict. So where does that leave us? From 5 different perspectives, you now know exactly what happened and what everyone saw on those nights, and the respective arguments made by the plaintiff and the defense during these examinations. In cases like this, where the plaintiff is pressing charges for not being able to keep a secret, the trial was not actually about who revealed Cummings' cheating to the world. If the defense could prove to a jury that Cummings cheated, it wouldn't matter that the secret got out because it wouldn't be slander, it was just truth. That was the whole argument from the defense. That's why the actual defense here, the Wilsons, Greens, and Berkeley Levitt, they don't actually feel like the ones on trial. To prove that slander took place, that the defense was spreading lies, they were first going to have to prove that Cumming was innocent and that it was in fact a lie. I want to flag another issue here that is apparent all over the case. There were apparently 14 people sitting at this table. I understand, as I said earlier, that they couldn't call other witnesses to the stand because their class didn't match those of the accusers or of Cumming or of the king. Fine. Stupid, but whatever. If you at home have ever gambled at a casino before, if someone is sitting there at a $10 minimum blackjack table, staking thousands of dollars a hand, you would notice it. It wouldn't just be 1 or 2 people noticing, all part of the same family. Every single person clocks it when somebody at a table is gambling with a lot more money than everybody else. A, it's kind of exciting, and B, it makes things very stressful when the guy starts losing. So if Cummings was really cheating with what is in today's money hundreds and thousands of pounds, every single person would have noticed that. Hey, you just added $7,000 to your pot mid-game. You would have noticed. The prince, who was the banker, and Owen Williams, who was the croupier on the second night, themselves didn't even notice. Mrs. Wilson, in her testimony, said that Cumming was the only person with 15-pound hands, so everyone there would have clocked cheating if that was truly the case. The only people that noticed were all members of the same family, except for the sole exception of Berkeley Levitt, but he was very young and probably drunk. Also, the parcel of boys line is absurd but true. The banker nor the croupier noticed the cheating, but the two dumb drunk kids did. How are they credible at all? What makes this whole thing odd, however, is the lack of gain from the Wilson family. The Wilsons at no point in this contract writing or gossiping or denial to retract in January tried to extort Cumming. It does feel kind of strange that if they really were ruining this man's life for cheating, a man who they harbored no ill will against, at least as far as the records show, they would have only done that for the reason of making money off of him. They even let him keep the money he won from those nights, which they had believed to have been stolen money. Did they just immediately believe the claims of young Arthur Stanley Wilson, who was, again, probably drunk, and then the next night looking for cheating and get hit with the delusion of confirmation bias? Yeah, none of these points are actually made by the defense or the plaintiff. Or if they are, it was so brief it didn't even matter. They aren't even really that relevant, but they should have been. These are the points that should have been hammered into the jury's ears, but they weren't. Edward Clark did a terrible job in his counsel for Cumming. He was not a career prosecutor used to cases like this, nor was he equipped for it. There are so many holes in the Wilson story that are just never brought up. In the cross-examinations of the Prince, or of Owen, who had direct jobs those nights that would have made spotting cheating obvious, but they never notice. Clark barely presses them on these dodges. This entire thing, from the nights themselves to the whole case, to me, feels like it was a massive cover-up. Maybe he cheated, maybe he didn't. There surely was not enough evidence to say without a shadow of a doubt that he was. His terrible job as lead counsel for Cumming directly led to an outcome that maybe was always going to happen, but ruined his life. The jury came out with their answer within 13 minutes. In 13 minutes, they were able to conclude that the defense was right. It worked. This campaign that they had led to bury this guy over what could have been a simple mistake of seeing someone play a strategy that they had not seen and mistook it as cheating. Cumming would be pretty much exiled. He would be denied his half pay from his resignation and returned to his estate in Scotland to live out his life until 1930 when he died. He would never be in aristocratic circles again. The Prince of Wales would not meet with anyone who even acknowledged his existence. He once confided to his daughter that, out of all the acquaintances he had, he thought he had at least 20 close, lifelong friends, none of which he ever heard from again. The rich always win. That's it. Please like.